Imagine an early morning. The city has not yet woken up. On the small stone-paved road, the pale yellow streetlights are still lazy, not yet completely turned off. The sound of footsteps echoes softly, hitting the wet stone surface after the night rain. Those are the footsteps of Ethan, a 27-year-old man, living alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor of an old building. He is not used to going out so early. But today, for some reason, Ethan woke up at 4 a.m., with a feeling of restlessness. He put on a thin coat, put his hands in his pockets, and just walked along the empty street. No car horns, no people calling each other, only the sound of the wind blowing through the treetops, sounding like someone whispering in a strange language. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. The cold air filled his chest, making him feel a little sore. And in that moment, he imagined the voice of his mother, who had died when he was 10. "Son, you must learn to listen. Not just to what people say, but also to what they don't say." Ethan opened his eyes and looked around. His mother's words seemed to echo somewhere. Throughout his childhood, his mother often told short stories, sometimes just a few minutes, sometimes an hour long, about strangers she had met. "Each story is like a musical note," she said. "Single-handedly, it's boring, but together, it becomes the harmony of life." This morning, when Ethan passed the corner coffee shop, he saw that the lights inside were still on. The small shop was called Morning Echo, and it opened at 6 a.m. But it was only nearly 5 a.m. Ethan was curious, and gently pushed open the glass door. A very faint clanging sound rang out. Inside, he saw a girl wiping the counter. Her hair was chestnut, loosely tied at the nape of her neck, her face tilted, slightly tired. Ethan cleared his throat. "Excuse me, is the shop open yet?" The girl was a little startled, turned around. Her eyes seemed to flash a little. "Not yet, but if you don't mind, you can sit. I'm still preparing." She spoke in a hoarse voice, as if she had just woken up or had just cried. Ethan sat down at the table by the window. The streetlights passed through the glass, casting streaks of light on the table. The girl brought a glass of water. "Wait for the coffee. I haven't turned on the machine yet." "It's okay. I like to sit still for a while." Ethan smiled, but his eyes couldn't hide his curiosity. She put down the glass of water, nodded slightly. Silence fell. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard. Finally Ethan spoke. "Do you usually open this early?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes slightly red. "No. Just today. I can't sleep." Ethan didn't ask any further. But it was the silence that made her continue. "There are nights when I lie listening to the wind outside the window. It reminds me of many things, and I can't sleep." Ethan nodded, as if he understood. He had nights like that too, where the past rushed in, messy, confusing. The girl slowly wiped the counter, then looked up, looking straight at Ethan. "Have you ever heard a story that didn't have a clear ending? Like someone tells it, then suddenly stops, leaving it hanging. At that time, you would make up an ending in your head, right?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Yes. I even thought that was the best way to tell a story. Because what's left unsaid tends to haunt longer." The girl smiled weakly. "Then let me tell you a story. A short story, with no clear ending. Once upon a time, there was a man named James. James lived in a remote countryside, where there were only grassy hills and wind. He had a black dog, very loyal. Every day James would wake up at dawn, make coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the mist gradually disappear. The dog lay at his feet, its eyes half closed. Then one morning, James did not wake up. He was found sitting there, still on the wooden chair, holding a cold cup of coffee. When did he die? The black dog did not bark, did not howl. It just lay there, its head resting on the tip of its master's shoe, its eyes closed, as if waiting for him to wake up. The girl paused, her fingers lightly tracing the wooden counter. They buried James on the edge of the hill. And the black dog? It disappeared. No one saw it again. Ethan was silent for a long time. He felt his throat dry, as if he had just seen someone off to the cemetery. So, where do you think the dog went? Ethan asked, his voice low. The girl shrugged, looking out the window. Maybe it went to find James somewhere we don't know. Or, it's just sitting there, waiting to be called back. Who knows what the real ending will be? Then she looked at Ethan, smiling sadly. It's the same with English. People don't always say everything they mean, they don't always use textbook grammar. They speak halfway, they swallow words, they sigh instead of speaking. To listen like a native, you have to learn to listen to those silences. Ethan leaned back, eyes closed. He thought of his mother, of the unfinished stories she used to tell. Perhaps it was those unfinished parts that trained his mind to listen, to imagine, the way people train their muscles. The girl quietly made coffee, the aroma rising, spreading throughout the small shop. The sound of the coffee machine hummed, sounding like a waiting heartbeat. Ethan looked at her hand, her thin, white fingers trembling slightly. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his either. Just like that, they sat together in a story has no clear ending. Outside, the sun is slowly rising, lifting the mist, revealing a rain-soaked street. But perhaps, between the two people who have just met, something else has just begun to bloom. A new story. Something that has not been named. White heavy check mark. End of part 1. Part 2, Unspoken Words. Light has poured in through the glass door. The first rays of sunlight sparkle on the table, highlighting each drop of coffee that has just spilled into the cup. Ethan rotates the cup in his hand, listening to the sound of porcelain hitting the small plate, creating a delicate sound. The girl standing behind the counter, still silently wiping the cup, seems not to want to break that peaceful moment. Have you lived here long? Ethan asks, not looking up. No. I just moved in 6 months ago. Her voice was soft, a little tired. I was in a bigger, noisier city before. But in the end, noise doesn't make you feel less lonely. Ethan nodded slightly, still looking out at the street. There, people began to appear. Old men selling newspapers on bicycles, old women walking their dogs, young men jogging. Life was going on as usual. Only inside this cafe, everything seemed to be separated from the world. Back in the old place, did you have a cafe like this? Ethan asked. The girl shook her head. No. But I have a friend, he told me a story. She put down the towel and leaned against the counter. He said one night, he was sitting in an empty bar. It was open late, the lights were dim, the jazz music was soft. There was an old man sitting at the counter, flipping through the menu, though it was clear he wasn't going to order anything else. My friend asked the old man, "Why don't you order something else?" The old man looked at him, and said, "I'm waiting for someone. But I don't think she's coming today." He folded the menu and put it on the table. "Anyway, I should leave her a seat." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes thoughtful. "That sounds sad." "Yeah," the girl sighed. "But then my friend said, the next morning when he came back, the old man was gone. There was only one empty chair where he sat. No one knew where he went, or if he saw the person he was waiting for." Ethan squeezed the handle of his cup lightly, as if to reassure himself. Perhaps, the old man just needed to wait for someone. Even if that person didn't come, waiting made him less lonely. The girl smiled softly. "Sometimes I think so too. There are evenings when I set up 2 seats at the dining table, even though I'm the only one there. Looking at the empty chair across from me, it feels strangely comfortable. It's like we're talking now. Maybe you'll leave after today, and we'll never see each other again. But at least this morning, there's no silence." Ethan put down his cup, leaned back, and looked straight at her. "So, tomorrow morning will you still open the shop this early?" "I don't know. If I can't sleep again, I'll probably open it. So if I wake up at 4 a.m., can I see you again?" She smiled, lowered her head, and didn't answer. But that silence was like an unspoken promise. A moment later she said again, "You know, the English I learned in the past was all grammar and reading. When I came here, I was really scared when I heard people speak. They skimmed over words, they connected sounds, they emphasized, and then left them hanging. Ethan laughed. Me too. When I was little, my mother made me memorize short stories, and made me repeat each sentence, to breathe, to pause like a native speaker. I hated it. Now I see, it's those pauses that make me like them. That's right. Because native speakers don't speak like books, she said, slowing down, slightly prolonging the last word. For example, when they say I don't know, I usually just hear to know. Or what are you doing becomes what ya doin'. And sometimes I just look, nod, and don't say anything, and I still understand, she said, her eyes lighting up as if remembering something. There was a couple sitting at this table the other day. The girl kept talking about work, while her boyfriend just looked, occasionally nodding and smiling. Then the girl said, "Why aren't you saying anything?" He just smiled, held her hand, and said, "Because your voice is enough for both of us." The girl blushed and fell silent. But looking at them, I believe she understood everything, even without saying anything. Ethan nodded. Actually, listening is not just listening to voices. You also listen to the eyes, the hands, the sighs. That's how you listen like a native. They were silent for a long time. The sound of traffic outside was more crowded, more urgent. But inside the restaurant, time seemed to stop. Ethan saw the girl yawn softly, then rub her eyes with her hand. "Sorry, I'm a little sleepy. Not because I'm bored, but because I didn't sleep all night." "Then you should rest a bit. I won't bother you anymore." "No, you stay here. I like having someone in the bar, so I don't feel alone." Ethan just smiled. He didn't know what to say, and he didn't need to say anything. Because sometimes, just being there is enough. A moment later, Ethan took out his wallet and pulled out a small photo. It was an old, slightly yellowed photo of a young woman smiling, her hair flying in front of her face. "This is my mother," he said, his voice a little hoarse. The girl took the photo and looked at it for a long time. "She looks so gentle. Like the look in your eyes when you listen to a story. She's the one who taught me to listen. Every night before bed, she would whisper a story, then stop, leaving me to guess the rest. When I was little, so annoying. When I grew up, I realized that it was those little gaps that helped me learn to listen, not just to listen to the words, but to listen to the meaning." She put the photo back, gently pushing it toward Ethan with both hands. "She must be very proud of you." The girl suddenly leaned her hands on the counter, sighing. "Do you believe that sometimes people tell stories to themselves?" "Yes." "Then let me tell you a story. I don't tell everyone this story." She looked up, looking straight at Ethan. 3 months ago, I had a regular customer. Every morning he sat at this table, ordered the same black coffee with ice, no sugar. He didn't say much. On the 27th day, he said, "Thank you for giving me peace all this time. I won't come back tomorrow." I asked why. He just smiled and said, "Tomorrow I'll be gone." And yes, he never came back. I didn't know where he went, or if he was still alive. But every morning since then, I've looked out the door, waiting to see if he'll come back. Ethan clenched his fists on the arms of his chair. Maybe he just wanted someone to remember him a little, that's all. The girl nodded, her eyes sparkling. Just like us. Sometimes all it takes is someone to remember that you existed. Outside, the sun was high. The sounds of the streets exploded, spilling through the cracks in the door. Ethan stood up and placed the money on the table. "Tomorrow, if you open early again, maybe I'll wake up early again." The girl said nothing. Just smiled, eyes still following him as he pushed the door open and walked out. The tinkling of the doorbell rang, ending a morning that was unclear where it would lead. But what was certain was that they had both begun to listen to each other, not just with their ears, but with the silence in their hearts. White heavy checkmark. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Moment of Pause. Ethan stepped out of the cafe, the bright sunlight making him squint. The loud noise of the traffic immediately swallowed him, as if the cafe was just a vague moment. But in his hand was still the lingering warmth of the cup of coffee. In his heart, there was still the girl's eyes, and the unfinished story. That night, Ethan came home, doing nothing but sitting by the window. He opened the door a crack, letting the night wind rush in, blowing through his hair, gently shaking the curtains. He sat like that for hours, not reading, not watching TV, just listening to the sounds of the city at night, the distant honking of cars, the sound of someone giggling down the street, and occasionally, the rustling of leaves like a whisper. In that silence, Ethan found himself listening more clearly than ever. Not with his ears, but with the loneliness he carried in his heart. A loneliness that, he now realized, the girl also carried. And perhaps everyone carried it, just that few dared to admit it. The next day, Ethan woke up earlier. At 3:45 he sat up. He was in no hurry. He took a cold shower, changed into a new shirt, smoothed his hair, and looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. When he went out, the streets were still dim. The door of the Morning Echo was open. The yellow lights inside seemed to beckon. Ethan's heart beat faster. The girl was standing behind the counter, her back slightly bent, as if checking the coffee machine. Hearing the clang of the door open, she turned around, startled. Then a small smile appeared on her lips, her eyes lit up. "You're here again." "Yeah. I wasn't sure if you'd open the door this morning, but I wanted to try. Luckily I couldn't sleep." They looked at each other, both of them laughing very softly. The laughter was fragile, as if afraid to break the already quiet space. "Do you want to hear another story?" the girl asked, her hand on the counter, her fingernails tapping lightly. "Of course. I think it's your short stories that are the reason I wake up at 4 o'clock. She thought for a moment, then began. "Once upon a time, there was a girl who worked at a laundry. She hated her job, because every day she just washed other people's dirty clothes, folded them neatly, and returned them. But one day, she found a small piece of paper in her pocket. It read, 'I hope whoever finds this note has a good day. Because if you find it today, it means you exist. And just by that, you have made someone's heart lighter.' The girl put the note in her wallet, and from then on, whenever she felt bored, she would take it out and read it. Then one day, she stopped working at the laundromat. She opened a small cafe, thinking that at least there, she could leave people with something more than just clean clothes." Ethan rested his chin on his hand, his eyes looking deeply into hers. "Is that you?" The girl laughed, shaking her head. "No. I don't work at the laundromat. But I also received a note like that, just in a different way. And it made me think maybe I should start over. Is that why you opened this shop?" She fell silent, looked up at him, and nodded slightly. After a moment, she made Ethan a latte. She set the cup down on the table, her hand still on the cup, her fingers lightly rubbing the ceramic. "Are you scared? Afraid of waking up one day and realizing you've wasted so much time doing nothing?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Yes. But then I consoled myself, knowing that at least I'd heard a few stories. And maybe they're keeping me from disappearing." The girl smiled sadly. "You know, a lot of people come here, order, and then bury their faces in their phones. Only occasionally looking up, as if to check if the shop is still there. Gee. They don't know that the shop is still here, they're just afraid that they've lost it." Ethan looked into her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder, if I suddenly disappeared, would anyone remember? Who would sit at this table, remembering a man who came here to listen to stories?" She put her hand on his, warm and slightly trembling. "At least I will be there." They were silent. No one withdrew their hand. Out on the street, the voices were clearer, signaling a new day. But here, time was still slowing down because of the words she had just said. Then, she said, her voice much lower, "Let me tell you one last story. There was a little sparrow, with a wounded wing. It couldn't fly, so it just hopped around in the backyard of a house. Every day, a child placed some crumbs for it. The sparrow finished eating, looked up at the sky, blinked, and then slept. One day, it stopped going out. The child was sad, but then it told its mother, 'I think the bird has finally flown.' It went to find the sky it always looked up to. Ethan swallowed. You tell stories that hurt and are both soothing. Like wind blowing through your chest, cool and cold. The girl smiled. Maybe that's how we hear ourselves more clearly. No noise, no hustle, just breathing. Ethan squeezed her hand a little more, then let go. Tomorrow, if you open early again, I'll come again. Because I think I want to hear more stories. Then don't disappear suddenly. Don't make me look at the empty chair and imagine where the person who used to sit there is. Okay. I won't let you do that. Ethan walked out of the shop, not forgetting to look back one last time. The girl stood inside, leaning her shoulder against the door, watching him, her lips moving slightly, something Ethan couldn't hear. But he didn't need to hear clearly. Because once he learned to listen, he knew. There are things that don't need words, but they are loud enough. Ethan continued walking on the street that was gradually getting brighter. His heart felt light, as if he had left a part of his loneliness in the small coffee shop, among stories with unknown endings.